God is still on the throne, and prayer changes things. This is Brother Hutchings inviting the listeners to another Watchman on the Wall program of Southwest Radio Ministry. And here now is Brother Jerry.
For the next 2 days, Dr. Larry Spargimino will be visiting with Avi Lipkin about his latest book, Return to Mecca. Avi lives in Israel but travels to the United States often, speaking in churches and other venues. He's also trying to start a Judeo-Christian political party in Israel. Here now are Dr. Spargimino and his guest, Avi Lipkin.
Thank you, Jerry, and greetings to all in our listening audience. Thank you so much, Avi, for being our guest.
Always a pleasure to be on your show.
Of course, you've written several insightful, in-depth books, and I've read all of them. They're very good. Is Fanatic Islam a Global Threat? Christian Revival for Israel's Survival, Islamic Threat Updates, Israel's Bible Block, Islam Prophesied in Genesis, and now Return to Mecca. Now, Avi, most authors who have written several books like you have a common thread that holds their work together. What's the common thread, the overarching message that the reader will find kind of as a theme of your books?
Islam. Not only to Israel, not only to America, not only to the Judeo-Christian West, but the threat to all of humanity. And the answers are there also in the books, how to deal with the threat, and that includes the creation of a Judeo-Christian political party in Israel to run for the Knesset, which is what I'm working to do for this next upcoming elections in a year and a half. Also, call for Christians of all denominations, to have revival in their churches and to bring Christianity back as the ruling force, the inspirational force for America and for the Christian West. But my last book, my most recent book, the sixth book that just came out, Return to Mecca, deals basically with the final battle, the termination of Islam. And, many people are, I don't want to say, desperate or depressed that it seems like Islam is winning. It seems like Islam is winning, but, Christians know the back of the book. And my message is kind of like a supplement to the back of the book. And I think that we're going to be seeing a final battle over Mecca. It's kind of like capture the flag. If we get Mecca and Medina, then it's the end of Islam. If the Muslims get Jerusalem, it's the end of Judeo-Christianity and the end of the world. And so basically there is no choice but to defeat Satan and send him to the pits of hell for 1,000 years. And that's basically the thrust of my sixth book.
There seems to be so much confusion today about Islam, about Judaism, Christianity. For example, Sean Stone, he's the son of the controversial director Oliver Stone, he says that Ahmadinejad has been woefully misunderstood. And, of course, you probably know he's converted to Islam. He did that in a ceremony in Isfahan, Iran. It seems like we need some moral clarity. To me, it's very clear, and I'm sure to you it's very clear. Do you think your book will really help restore us to moral clarity on this very important issue?
I believe so. Clarity, definitely, yes. With the thrust, basically, of the book, there are two thrusts. The first thrust, of course, is the Bible. My fifth book deals with Islam prophesied in Genesis. This newest book deals with Islam prophesied in Exodus, but not only Exodus. It's also in Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, 1 Kings, Zechariah, Psalms. And so what I do is I have collated from the Bible, and by the way, from the New Testament as well, chapter 4 of Galatians, verse 25, to show that the Israelites were in Arabia during the 40-year Exodus. And, our footprints are all over the place. And God says, wherever your feet will tread will be yours. And like I said before, I see this basically as a sign that Islam, as you know, is a failed system. Islam is bankrupt. Islam does not create industry. It does not plant trees in the desert. It is not a system of creation. It is a system of destruction. And the first thing that we see in Islam, we see this today in the Arab world, is that the Muslims are killing each other. And, they want to kill the Jews on Saturday and the Christians on Sunday, but before they can get around to doing that, they're killing each other. And I want to make it very clear from the outset that I love the Muslims. I don't hate them. I think they're great people, just like any other people, because Muslims, like any other people, are created in the image of God. But Islam is a rotten system. It is a system very similar to Nazism, communism, and Tojo fascism of Japan, completely destructive systems, inhuman systems, anti-Semitic and anti-Christian systems. And like I said before, this is a system that does not know how to bless its people, does not know how to create, it knows how to destroy. And we see the Arabs destroying each other today. And the reason I wrote the book is to prepare Jews and Christians and people all over the world to the final collapse of the Saudi kingdom. The Saudi kingdom is going to collapse, to implode upon itself, and it's not because of the Jews and the Christians. It's because the innate nature of Islam is division and destruction and civil war, and it's everybody against everybody else. I mean, this is the prophecy in Genesis 16, verse 11 about Ishmael, that he will be a wild donkey, a wild ass of a man. His hand will be against everybody else's hand, and everybody else's hand is going to be against his hand, and he's going to dwell in the face of his brethren. And so Saudi Arabia is going to have a civil war. It's going to implode. Certain people in the Saudi kingdom close to the United States are going to beg the United States to come in and save them. The United States is going to say, well, Saudi Arabia is a pretty big country, and you know what we'll do? We'll let the Israelis take the northwestern part, which is close to Eilat, and we'll take care of the rest, you know. And the strategic overview of this basically is that the Saudi kingdom will implode. Israel will basically be given no choice but to go in and take northwest Saudi Arabia, which is where Mount Sinai and Mount Horeb are, and of course Mecca and Medina. And once that happens, we declare the end of Islam. We ban Islam, just like Nazism was banned in Germany in 1945 and Tojo fascism was banned in Japan.
I love what you say in your earlier book, and you touched on it before, Islam prophesied in Genesis. You say, quote, I believe the Muslims are good people, and I want to underscore this. We're not against any, group of people, and you say like Germans and Japanese, but they are plagued by Islam, a system, in my opinion, I'm quoting you, worse than Nazism or Tojo fascism. When the Germans lost in 1945, they actually won because democracy took over. So you're saying that the Muslim people, if Islam were to fall, would actually win because that's the problem.
You know, I have to tell you a little story. I'm going off a little bit on a tangent.
Yeah, your tangents are very interesting, so go ahead.
Thank you. You know, one of the descriptions of the God with a small g, known as Allah, is in Arabic, he's called Al-Makr. Makr, M-A-C-K-E-R, like Mack trucks. So Al-Makr in Arabic means the cunning one, but it is also synonymous with the greatest of all the liars and deceivers. In other words, by their own very definition of their own God, Allah, he is the greatest of liars and deceivers. And now if you're a Christian, you understand that the greatest of all the liars and deceivers is whom? Is Satan, Lucifer, the devil. And in the Middle East, it is a virtue to lie. In the Judeo-Christian world, it is a virtue to tell the truth. It is a commandment to tell the truth. In Islam, it's the opposite. Now, in 1967, Allah, the God of the Muslims, told the Muslims that Israel was going to be wiped off the face of the earth, that Islam was going to kill every last Jew on the face of the earth. And lo and behold, what happened? Allah lied to the Muslims, and Israel won the war. So the Muslims were all, they were in a tiff. They didn't know what was going on here. They said, hey, our God, we know he's the greatest. But this time he pulled a fast one on us. Allah lied to the Arabs. He lied to the Palestinians. And guess what? The Jews won the war. Now, of course, you and I understand and know that there were a lot of miracles in that war. But again, the fact is that within the first, 2 hours of the war, Israel knocked out all the air forces of the enemy, and that basically decided the war. But there were also tremendous tank battles and infantry battles and artillery battles, and in 6 days the war was over. So what happened? Now, this is the crazy part here. The Palestinians, the Muslims, were saying, you know what, we're a little tired of this God. This God, Allah, is lying to us, and he's misleading us. And you know what, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of the Jews and the Christians, this is really the true God. And maybe what we need to do is switch over to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And what happened, okay, and here comes the crazy stuff, because Americans, Jews and Christians think differently than Muslims do. Moshe Dayan says to the Arabs, okay, we won the war. We are now going to extend the olive branch and make peace with you. And to show you that we're serious about peace, we're ready to give you back the keys to the Temple Mount where the mosques are. And you know what the Muslim approach was? Instead of saying, hey, these Jews are great, they're magnanimous in war, and extending the olive branch and let's make peace, they said, you know what, these Jews are stupid. And even somebody brilliant like Moshe Dayan has been misled and confused by Allah. that Allah is the greater of the two gods, because Allah succeeded in confusing Moshe Dayan. And so, listen, what does it say in the New Testament? Blessed are the peacemakers, right?
Absolutely.
And then also, what did Jesus say? He says, I don't remember the exact verse and chapter, but he says, if you are going off to war against the king with 20,000, and you only have 10,000, maybe it's better to send off an ambassador of peace. In other words, what Moshe Dayan was saying after the Six-Day War, these Arabs still outnumbered us. Maybe we should make peace with them. And so he said, here are the keys to the Temple Mount. That was a sign of weakness. That was a sign that Allah succeeded in confusing Moshe Dayan. So you know what the Arabs said? We're going to stick with Allah, because he is the greatest of all the liars and deceivers.
Well, you have a way of telling a story. It's always very interesting. And what I love about your books, of course, you read Hebrew, and you have a lot in this book, Return to Mecca, about Exodus, and go into Leviticus and so forth. And there's such a Jewish insight and Jewish flavor. It's really rich and really a great blessing. But let's back up a little bit. Why the title, Return to Mecca?
Because we are going to return to Mecca.
Well, tell us how that's going to work out, and what proof do you have from the Word of God?
Okay, well, firstly, let me say one thing. I have to apologize to both Jews and Christians, because I must seem like a crazy guy. I'm the only Jew in the world who sang these things. I was in seminary 20 years ago to become a conservative rabbi, and we were taught about the phylacteries. And, I don't know how many of you know what phylacteries are, but I explained this, and I show this with pictures in my book. And the reason it's important for Christians to understand what are the phylacteries is because Jesus himself put on phylacteries. Jesus himself put on the prayer shawl. And when I was in seminary, the very first, I was 41 years old. I was a late bloomer. And the first verse of the New Testament that I ever read in my life was Matthew 23, verse 5. Professor Israel Lee Levine at the seminary was showing us that it says in Matthew 23, verse 5, Jesus is criticizing the Pharisees for being hypocrites. And he's saying, for all their works they do for to be seen of men. They make broad their phylacteries, and they enlarge the hems of their garments, which is the tzitzit on the prayer shawl. And but Jesus never said don't put on phylacteries or prayer shawls, because as you know, the miracle of the woman with the issue of blood, the woman who had endometriosis for 12 years, she touched the fringe of Jesus' prayer shawl. If you remember, the young lady who was given up for dead, and Jesus basically performed CPR on her. And he said, Talit Kumi. Talit Kumi means by the power of the talit, get up. And she got up. It was a miracle. So Jesus used the talit. By the way, Greek Orthodox priests in the Greek Orthodox Church also put on a Greek form of phylacteries. And when I asked them, why do you do this? They said, well, if Jesus put on phylacteries, we put on phylacteries. Anyway, so why am I telling you this little technical thing here? Because, I asked them, they were trying to prove that Matthew 23, verse 5 was written circa somewhere between the year 50 and 70 A.D., and it shows that the Jews were wearing phylacteries 2,000 years ago. Wellhausen, who was a German biblical scholar, had a theory that the phylacteries were a new invention, relatively speaking, maybe a few centuries old. But the fact is, that Yigal Yadin found specimens of this phylactery at Masada and in other places. And so, the desert climate preserved the leather. These things are made out of leather. And there you have it in the New Testament. So there you have absolute proof that the phylacteries were in use 2,000 years ago. And so I asked Professor Israel Lee Levine, how far back do the phylacteries go? He said, well, it goes back to the Ten Commandments, back to Mount Sinai. But upon inspection in Exodus 13, guess what? In Exodus 13, we have not yet gotten to Mount Sinai. We are still in Egypt in slavery. And, Moses, there are a whole lot of things. You put them together, and pieces like of a jigsaw puzzle, and you realize, Moses, after he kills the taskmaster, he flees to Jethro, who is his father-in-law eventually. And, the question is, did he just, stumble and mumble over to Jethro in Midian? By the way, Midian is Medina, in case people don't know. And, I'm saying, listen, Moses was almost Pharaoh. He knew the geography, and he knew the neighbors on the other side of the pond, which is the Red Sea. And so he knew exactly where to go to get away from Pharaoh. He went to his prospective father-in-law, and he married the daughter of Jethro. Anyway, then he tends the flocks of Jethro for 40 years, and he sees the burning bush. Now, before he goes back to Egypt, 40 years, he was the understudy to his father-in-law. And, father-in-law basically incorporated him into his business. What was his business? He was the high priest of Midian, of Medina. Now, there was no city of Mecca in those days. There was just this black stone in the middle of nowhere. And it was a 3-day hike from Medina. What does Moses say to Pharaoh? He says, we need 3 days in the desert. And also he says another thing to Pharaoh when he goes to Pharaoh. The first time he says 6 times, let my people go. But the first time is different than the other times. He says, let my people go so that they may circle me in the desert, meaning circle the Lord in the desert. And what is it? You know, the word Chag in Hebrew means holiday. You know, like Chag Sameach means happy holiday. The word Chag in Arabic means Hajj or Chag is somebody who goes to Mecca on pilgrimage. It's the same word. It means going around in circles, around the black stone. And so what I have come to, I'm the only guy in the world who's saying this. A lot of rabbis think I'm nuts. Maybe I am nuts. But I think that this is the truth, that the phylacteries that appear in Exodus 13 while we are still in Egypt are a sign from God. They are a token from God, a replica of the black stone in the middle of the desert, which represented our freedom from slavery. Now, don't forget, what was the symbol of Egypt? It was the pyramid, a triangle. What was the symbol of freedom? A cube, a rectangle. You got to remember, the Israelites were pagans like everybody else. There was no Judaism or Christianity or Islam. Everybody was a pagan. And, you know, the Israelites were worshiping the golden calf in Egypt. And when they went into the desert and Moses didn't come back, they made a golden calf because that was the God that they knew. And so the phylacteries were like a gyroscope to the Israelites, saying, guess what, you're going to leave the pyramid system on the west side of the Red Sea, and you're going to go to the east side of the Red Sea, and you're going to then worship the Lord at that black stone. And so I think that, you know, most young people don't even know what a gyroscope is, you know, but old people like you and me, we remember a gyroscope from school days, that phylacteries are like gyroscopes. So where is Moses taking us? He's taking us across the pond, and we are in the desert for 40 years. And what my book does, it gives a number of examples from the Torah that show that the Israelites were indeed in what is today Saudi Arabia. And Mecca did not exist. We had a black stone, but Medina did exist. By the way, 2 names of Medina give it away. Medina in Arabic today is called Medina Minawara. Minawara in Arabic means menorah. And you've got menorahs etched into the rocks there in Saudi Arabia all over the place. And another name for Medina is Yathrib. Yathrib means Jethro in Arabic. So one of the names of Medina is Jethro. And my wife and I, you know, we're very romantic people. Instead of going to Blockbusters to get a romantic movie, we watch Saudi TV and Egyptian TV and Al Jazeera TV. And every time we see that black stone there in Mecca, the Imam says that Aaron and Moses and Jethro were here. And you go to Saudi Arabia, they'll tell you where Mount Sinai is. It's not in the Egyptian peninsula of Sinai where Helena, the mother of Constantine, says it is. And there's absolutely no archaeological proof that it's in Sinai of Egypt. It is in northwestern Arabia. And I don't know if you ever heard of Jim and Penny Caldwell.
Yes, I have. In fact, I think it would have been very difficult for the Israelites to sojourn 40 years in the Sinai, because didn't the Egyptians have several military garrisons in the Sinai, and then there's also the chariot wheels and other material remains between, Nuweiba and the Saudi coast. So I'm very convinced it was northwest Saudi Arabia.
You know what? One of the things that drives me crazy is that the Jewish people, a lot of Jewish people, a lot of rabbis, have this disdain for Christians. And yet they swallow hook, line, and sinker what Helena, the mother of Constantine, said, that Santa Catarina in the Sinai Peninsula is where the real Mount Sinai is. And you know, why should rabbis accept that? One of the problems today in Judaism, in the ultra-Orthodox circles, is that the ultra-Orthodox do not study geography. They do not understand world realities. Their mind is constantly in the Talmud. Now, the Talmud is a brilliant collection of books. Has a lot of good stuff in it. But the rabbis are so busy exclusively studying only the Jewish law, not studying history, not studying geography, not studying sciences. So what happens is, you know, a lot of rabbis today, when I speak to them, ultra-Orthodox rabbis, and I say, listen, I have this idea about the phylacteries, that it was the replica of Mecca, they almost want to kill me. They say, are you saying we're Muslims? I said, no. Islam came later. Islam basically adopted the pagan system of Arabia under Muhammad, but we're talking about 2,000 years before that, when the Israelites were sojourning in Arabia. And their answer to the rabbis is, well, the Torah is not a GPS. They know what a GPS is, you know. They said Torah is not a GPS. I said, I'm sorry, I disagree. Torah is a GPS. And throughout my book, this new book, Return to Mecca, I explain, I give proofs that we were in Arabia. I mean, even the tent of the meeting, when they're explaining about the geographical directions of the beams, the boards that, you know, where they put this thing together, they said certain boards are going to face in the direction of Yemen. Certain boards are going to face in the direction of the sea, behind us is the sea, is the Red Sea. So if Yemen is to the right and the sea is behind us, then we're in Arabia. It couldn't be any other place. And also in Deuteronomy 2, verse 2, God says, enough being encamped around this mountain, head north to the land of the Amorites. So if we have to head north, where were we? We were south. So, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to read the Torah and say, you know what, the Israelites were in Arabia for 40 years. Okay, now let's fast forward. We leave Arabia, we conquer the land of Israel, and we're there, and then we're exiled once, and we're exiled twice, and, the Jewish people are just as pagan as any other people on the face of the earth, and sometimes we even exceed the sins of the other nations when we should have been a nation of priests, and God punishes us. But God says, you know what, I'm going to bring you back. There's going to be a little remnant, and indeed Israel today is a little remnant, and he brings these people back. And God says in Deuteronomy 11, he says, okay, these are the borders that Israel is going to have. This is from the Mediterranean to the Euphrates and from Lebanon to the desert. And the purpose of this book is to establish the borders. And the borders to the south, when it says the desert, that's not the Negev. The Negev is Judah. It's not Sinai of Egypt, because that's Egypt. The great and horrible desert is Saudi, is Arabia. And so what I'm saying is, Jews, Christians, and Muslims all understand that the day of judgment is rapidly approaching. And, for the Jews and Christians, that means the Jewish Messiah who speaks Hebrew and he's from the land of Israel. For the Muslims, it's going to be a Muslim Jesus who's going to kill the Jews on Saturday and kill the Christians on Sunday. And, it would be funny if it weren't so crazy. So the point I'm saying is that we know the day of judgment is coming. We know that those borders that God mentions in Deuteronomy 11, which have never yet been fulfilled, are yet to be fulfilled. And what I think is going to happen, and I've spoken about this on the Southwest Radio Church many times, is that the Muslims are planning the final solution of the Jews in America, Canada, Europe, Latin America. They're going to kill every last Jew on the face of the earth. There cannot be the Islamic Mahdi or Islamic victory until every last Jew is killed on Saturday and every last Christian is killed on Sunday. So what's going to happen is, like I said before, it will lead to a tragic Armageddon battle, tragic for them. Those Armageddon armies are defeated. Israel is going to expand to the natural size that God said, which includes the great and horrible desert to the south. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to show our legal rights to that area, our connection.
Now, let's back up just a little bit. We may be picking up some new listeners who didn't hear the interview yesterday, but on the cover of your book, you have a picture of the Kaaba and the words, "Let my people go so that they may circle me in the desert." And you touch on that. That's the first appearance of those words. Now, tell us about the Kaaba in Mecca and the phylacteries mentioned in the Bible, that every phylactery has those 4 pouches, the 4 parchments, the square size, and so on. Tie all that together for us.
Yes, well, indeed, firstly, the Kaaba is a very large black stone, which is really not indigenous at all to that area of Arabia, or any area that we know of. And there are all kinds of theories. If you believe in UFOs, a UFO brought it. If you believe that God miraculously brought it, then God miraculously brought it. Now, the Muslims have an idea that they'd say that Abraham and Ishmael built the Kaaba. And by the way, they say that Abraham was not supposed to sacrifice Isaac at Mount Moriah. He was supposed to sacrifice Ishmael at the Kaaba in Mecca. And, 3 genies appeared. They got genies in the Quran. I don't know if you know that or not. You know what a genie is. I am the genie of the lamp. I will give you 3 requests. This is what's in the Quran. I'm very serious. So 3 genies appear before Hagar, Abraham, and Ishmael, and they say, sacrifice Ishmael. So what do Hagar, Abraham, and Ishmael do? They pick up stones, and they start chasing these demons, these genies, and throwing stones at them, and they chase them away. Now, today, as part of the Hajj, as part of the pilgrimage to the Black Stone in Arabia there, in Mecca, the Saudis have built 3 tremendous cement columns. And the Hajjis, the people who go on the Hajj, on the pilgrimage to Mecca, pick up stones ritually, and they throw the stones at the 3 columns representing the 3 genies. I mean, this is not the Bible. This is something out of La La Land. This is what the Muslims believe. Well, the Muslims have a replacement theology. The whole idea of Isaac as being the chosen son is hateful, anathema to Islam. And, by the way, I want to remind your listeners, by the way, Jews don't know this, but the very first verse of the New Testament says, these are the generations of Jesus Christ, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so, this whole idea of Ishmael being the chosen son is totally anathema and hateful to every Jew and every Christian. And yet you have Jews and you have Christians who are ecumenical with the Muslims, and it's like saying, hey, we are people of God. Let's have ecumenical relations with the people of Satan. And so the purpose of the book is to show just how diametrically opposed the Islamic system is from the Judeo-Christian system, which I say is one system. And by the way, I get a lot of heat in Israel from the rabbis for saying that.
I'm sure you would. Yeah, well, there's a movement in American Christianity. It's called Chrislam, kind of merging Islam and Christianity. Of course, they don't fit, but some of the big name pastors and Christian writers in America are moving in that direction. It's absolutely ridiculous. But go ahead, you were unfolding.
By the way, I have to tell you one little thing. There's one little church there in Florida. I go twice a year. I go to this church in Florida. Very sweet people, and the pastor, has this normal Sunday morning Christian service, and that's usually when I speak. Friday nights they have now a Hebraic roots Christian service, and Friday, and so they get a call from the local mosque, from the local imam. And he says to the pastor, he says, Alhamdulillah, praise Allah. You people are praying on Fridays, and Friday is our holy day of the Muslims. And how about if we have a Chrislam service? Let's pray together. And if you guys agree, we're going to pay you $25,000. And, with all due respect, the pastor said to them, well, I don't think so. But, there are a lot of pastors that get sucked in by this. And there are a lot of churches today. I'm not picking on the churches, by the way, because you got a lot of crazy rabbis also who love Islam and they hate Christianity. And so you got a lot of Christians who love Islam and they hate Christianity because, according to my contention, Allah is Satan. And that black stone in Mecca represents what is today the vortex of all evil, in my opinion. Anyway, but getting back to the phylactery. So we understand what the Kaaba is. The Kaaba is a very unusual black stone in a place where there are no black stones. It is a holy place for Muslims. It was a holy place for 2,000 years before Muhammad to the pagans of Arabia. Pagans had 360 gods. And by the way, the Israelites, when they left Egypt, I believe, God brought them to Arabia. But he waylaid the Jews, the Israelites, and God sent them, said, okay, now you're going to turn left. You're not going to go to the right. You're going to turn left and head towards Mount Sinai. And by the way, when you get to Mount Sinai, northwestern Saudi Arabia, when you get up to the top and it's a clear day, you see the Gulf of Aqaba. You almost see a lot from there. So the Israelites are 430 years in jail, in prison in Egypt. And what's the symbol of Egypt? The pyramid, which is a triangle. What's the symbol of the religion on the other side of the pond? It's the cube, the black cube, the Kaaba. And Moses, according to my contention, is the understudy to Jethro, who is the high priest of Midian, which I say is Medina. And after 40 years of doing this stuff, he says, hey, guess what? This system's a lot nicer than the Egyptian system. Let's go. So God says, go back, take the Israelites out of slavery, and bring them across the pond to the good system, which is the black stone. Again, we're talking about pagan systems. We're not talking about an established monotheistic religion like Judaism or Christianity. We're talking about the simple, primitive pagan systems of that time. And the Egyptians had many, many gods. They worshipped the beetle, and they worshipped the eagle, and they worshipped the cows, and they worshipped Pharaoh. Pharaoh was God himself. And on the other side of the pond, you had the black stone, and they had 360 pagan gods, one for every day of the year. Everything was pagan in those days. And so God says to Moses in Exodus 13, tell the people of Israel to make phylacteries, which are perfect black cubes, which I say are replicas of the black stone in Mecca. And because these simple primitive peoples, they needed an omen. They needed a sign. You have to remember, primitive peoples, they need a tangible God. They needed something tangible. Moses is stuck up on the mountain for 40 days. What do they need? They needed a tangible God to make the golden calf, which is what they were worshiping for 400 years. They were shepherds. The Israelites were shepherds. So the God of the Israelites was the cow. Anyway, so the Israelites leave Egypt in Exodus 13, and they have these phylacteries. Then later, in Deuteronomy, which is about 38 years later, we see the addition of Deuteronomy 6 and Deuteronomy 11, and those are the four parchments which are inside of the phylacteries. Now, by the way, if I were a Christian phylactery maker, I would have 5 parchments inside of because I'd have Matthew 23, verse 5. So, hey, listen, you got to have a sense of humor here.
Hey, amen. Keeps you going.
Yeah, but the phylacteries are a holy item, like I said, for Jews and especially for the Greek Orthodox Christians.
All right. Well, we are speaking to Avi Lipkin, and we're talking about his new book, Return to Mecca. I know a lot of our listeners might not be able to continue. Maybe they're in their car, they're getting out. Let's get our announcer, Jerry, to the mic. We're going to be right back with Avi Lipkin, but let's get Jerry to the mic. Jerry, how can our listeners get their own copy of Return to Mecca? Because this is a book they'll really want to study.
Here are the ways to get it. Phone 1-800-652-1144. Write to Southwest Radio, Box 100, Bethany, Oklahoma, 73008. The website address is swrc.com. Return to Mecca is offered for a contribution of $20 in the U.S., $22 in Canada. Don't miss getting the 260-page book. Here again are Brother Larry and Avi Lipkin.
Thank you, Brother Jerry. Let's get back to our interview with Avi Lipkin. You know, Avi, it seems that, when you're telling us about the Kaaba and all of these different ideas in Islam, it seems that it's really a question of biblical authority. Now, I know the Muslims claim that the Christians and the Jews have corrupted the Bible. How do you deal with this charge that the Bible doesn't have the true story, the Quran does, or the Muslims do? What's your response?
Well, I have two responses. The first response is that one of the names of Allah, the God of Islam, is Al-Makr, the greatest of all the liars and deceivers. So, of course, for Christians, that's Satan, Lucifer, the devil, because the devil is a liar. He's the greatest of all the liars and deceivers. Now, I'm going to ask you a rhetorical question, which, of course, you don't have to answer because you and I know the answer already. And the question is our God a liar? Is our God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the greatest of all the liars and deceivers? No, our God is the opposite. Does our God break covenant? No, our God is a covenant God. When God makes a covenant, and he says it's an eternal covenant, it's an eternal covenant, period. The Christians are grafted into the Jews, Romans 9 to 11. So Christians and Jews believe that God has given us together, Jews and Christians, an eternal covenant, and our God is not going to break that covenant because he's not a liar. Now, chapter 5, verse 60 of the Quran says the following: Allah cursed those who betrayed him, meaning, it doesn't say the Jews and Christians, but it means the Jews and the Christians. Why? Because we Jews and Christians refused to recognize Muhammad as the greatest and the latest of the prophets. And because we refused to recognize him as the greatest and latest of the prophets, Allah cursed us and turned us into monkeys and pigs. Now, in the Quran, chapter 5, verse 60, the Jews and Christians are monkeys and pigs. And if you really want to know the truth, what you do is you go to any 6 or 7-year-old Muslim school child here in America that goes to the Muslim schools, whether the Saudi schools or the Turkish Gulen schools, and you ask them, who are the monkeys and pigs? They say the Jews and the Christians. Why? Because the Jews and the Christians betrayed Allah by not recognizing Muhammad. And then, of course, they add to this that we distorted the truth and that the truth is in the Quran. So what it shows is Allah is the greatest of all the liars and deceivers. He breaks covenant and he curses us and turns us into pigs and monkeys. By the way, the Mufti of Jerusalem in 2003, and now the new Mufti, was preaching, kill the Jews, kill the Christians. Kill the Israelis, kill the Americans, kill the monkeys, and kill the pigs. So this comes from chapter 5, verse 60 of the Quran. So Allah, the greatest of all the liars and deceivers, hates us. He wants the Jews dead on Saturday, and he wants the Christians dead on Sunday. And, you can't tell me that's God. That can only be Satan, Lucifer, the devil. Okay? The second thing I wanted to say is that the Quran, which is the greatest of all the distortions on the face of the earth, was written by a rabbi and a priest who were kidnapped and forced at the edge of the sword to write a holy book for these illiterate desert nomads. The people of Muhammad were illiterate desert nomads. They didn't know how to read or write. And so the rabbi and the priest were forced, like I said, they were promised their freedom when they completed the Quran, but they were double-crossed and they were killed by these Muslims because the Muslims are liars. Their religion is a lie and their God is a lie, so the Quran is a lie. But the rabbi and the priest self-destructed the Quran from the very beginning. The name of the rabbi was Ovadia ben Shalom. The name of the priest was Sergius Buchaira. And if you ever speak to any Jew or Christian from the Middle East that speaks Arabic, they will tell you the names because the oral tradition has been passed down. But not only oral tradition, I'm quoting a Catholic priest from India who wrote a book in 1912 called The Life of Muhammad. And he says, and he gives the names of the rabbi and the priest. And these people, jazzed up the Quran, and they put in some, Bible in it, New Testament and Old Testament, but they did it in such a way that they sabotaged the Quran from the very beginning. When you read the Quran, if you know the New Testament and Old Testament, if you know the Talmud, you can see the fingerprint of the rabbi and the priest. This whole subject of the Quran being basically a joke book, that the rabbi and the priest are mocking the Muslims, and the Muslims never picked up on this.
It seems to me that by the time of Muhammad, he was born, 570 A.D., right?
Yes, and he died in 632.
Right. So by that time, there were thousands of copies of Bible books, Bible manuscripts that had been spread all over the ancient world, that had been dispersed widely. So to corrupt the Bible, they would have had to have found every manuscript, they would have had to go into every monastery, every church, every cave, every preacher's hut to destroy the so-called true Bible. That's just impossible. The whole thing seems rather fantastic to me, and when somebody says, well, the Bible has been corrupted, the Quran is a true story, I think it's easy to defend the Bible and certainly not the Quran. But, Avi, you have so...
By the way, excuse me for interrupting. I got to say something.
Yes, go ahead.
There is a magazine in the United States of America called the Atlantic Monthly. And the Atlantic Monthly, January 1999, has an article. I recommend to all your listeners to go to the library and look for this. There is an article there about 4 German scientists, professors from the University of Saarbrücken in South Germany. They went to Yemen, and in Yemen they found a whole treasure trove of over 100,000 parchments that had been physically cut out from Quran books of that time. And in other words, they were cut out for political reasons. In other words, the Quran has been changed, it has been abridged for political reasons, and so the Quran appears in different versions. And I think there's another version in Morocco also, because one of the daughters of one of the children of Muhammad fled to Morocco not to be killed. And that's in Morocco. So I'm just saying there are different versions of the Quran. The Quran has been abridged. It has been redacted. And so when they say there's only one true word, and it's the word of Allah, and it's the Quran, and it wasn't touched by man, that's a bloody lie.
Atlantic Monthly, January 1999. It talks about one of the caliphs saw that there were so many variant copies that he was the one who decided which was the right one and the true one. But actually there was a great deal of confusion before that time, and the fact that he had to come out with a true version indicates that there were a lot of different versions. So I think that's very damaging. But anyhow, while I've got you and you're so excited, let's talk a little bit about Iran. All of these horrific things are coming out from Iran. People say, well, we ought to do something, but if we don't do anything, they'll have a nuclear bomb. If Israel does take military action, they'll close the Straits of Hormuz, on and on and on. So, Avi, as a lover of peace, religious liberty, a lover of freedom, the free world, American Israel, what should be done in this horrific situation? It seems to me to be getting worse every day.
Well, I believe that there are 4 reasons for the war with Iran, which is coming, or rather 5 reasons, and I'll start with the least important. Least important is that the people of Iran are good people, and they need a regime change. And I believe that President Obama, the international conductor of the orchestra, is going to lead a war against Iran probably a month or 2 before his re-election. Excuse me for saying this, but I'm just saying this is calculated to free the people of Iran, bring in a proportional representation, a regime under the United Nations, one world government. And that's the least of the reasons. Second reason is the nuclear threat. Nuclear threat to Israel, nobody cares about Israel. Nobody cares if Israel gets nuked. I mean, of course, Christians do and Jews do, but most of the world is pagan. So, okay, nobody cares about Israel. The third reason is much more important. The Saudis are more threatened than the Jews are. The Saudis are Sunnis. The Saudis will have their heads chopped off by the Iranians because the Iranians see the Saudis as heretics, infidels, and traitors. So the Saudis, who I believe put Obama in as their man, the Saudis are commanding Obama, and they say to him, your job is first to destroy the Shiite threat, meaning the Ayatollah regime, replace it with another regime, and secondly, your job after you get reelected is to destroy Israel. And this is something my wife picked up in an Arabic broadcast from the Egyptian TV. If people go to YouTube, Saudi plant, they can pick up the whole thing there. The fourth reason for the war is that President Obama needs this war to get reelected, but the war should not be now, according to Obama. The war should be into the summer or late summer so that he can ride on this crest of new popularity that the Jews and Christians will vote for him because he saved Israel when all these missiles were crashing into Israel. The fifth reason, and this is the real reason for the war, is oil. The world is thirsty for oil. And the one world government, which is in bed with the Muslims, is the harlot riding the dragon, in my opinion. The one world government wants the oil. You cannot get to that oil until you destroy the Iranian regime and bring in an international regime which will be subservient to the oil companies. So I think that these are the 5 reasons for the war with Iran. I think it'll happen sometime this year, probably much closer to the elections than now. But I think that the Iranian regime will be removed, and then what we will see is the Shiites in Syria, the Shiites in Lebanon will be terminated by the Sunnis, and then we're going to see a monolithic Sunni Armageddon army marching on Israel, which will probably be in 4 or 5 years from now.
Well, I know I've been to Israel 3 times. I wish I had been there many more times, and maybe we'll be able to go again in the future. But it's amazing, and I've been in other Middle Eastern countries as well. But Israel is so much like America. You know, you're safe on the streets. People are friendly. You don't feel like something bad is going to happen. You don't have to hide. You know, we take tours. We have our Bibles. It's just amazing. It's such a small island of sanity and safety in the Middle East, and there are, what, 60 million Muslims all around them who want to destroy them. Ahmadinejad says that Israel is a cancerous tumor, and on and on and on. You know, I wish more Americans would realize how precious Israel is. They are an ally. They're so much like us. We're so much like them. And I just praise the Lord for the Christians who in America support Israel. But now tell us about your party that you're working in.
Okay, well, I'm working to form a Judeo-Christian Bible bloc party. Again, a political party based on the principles of the Bible, but not only the Bible, all of the progress that the human race has made in the last 2,000 years, including the abolition of slavery and equal rights, suffrage for women. 100 years ago, even in America, women didn't have too many rights. And in Israel today, we have a problem with the ultra-Orthodox rabbis who do not understand things the way I do, that, we have the American system and suffrage and equality. And what I'm trying to do is bring the blessings of the Western Christian system to Israel, which blesses its people. 3 million Israelis left Israel to live in Western Christian countries because those countries bless their people better than Israel does.
Avi, it's been so great speaking to you again. May God bless you and give you traveling mercies. I know you're all over the country, and you're going to be back in Oklahoma City in a while, so we will be seeing you shortly. Well, friends, this is a book that you will want to have, Return to Mecca by Dennis Avi Lipkin. Give you great insight. This is something you can't just read through and then put it down and pass it on. You want to study it very, very closely. So, Jerry, come to the mic and tell our listeners how they can get their own copy of Return to Mecca.
One way is to call 1-800-652-1144. Write to Southwest Radio Ministries, P.O. Box 100, Bethany, Oklahoma 73008. Or visit the website at swrc.com. The 260-page book, Return to Mecca, is available in appreciation of a $20 contribution in the United States, $22 in Canada. This is without doubt a book you'll want to add to your personal library. You can also get the 2 programs in this series on CD for an offering of $14 in the U.S., $15 in Canada. Call 1-800-652-1144. Write to Southwest Radio, Box 100, Bethany, Oklahoma 73008. The web address is swrc.com. Those listening early in the morning can now begin calling at 4 a.m. Central Daylight Time. Call center remains open until 6 in the evening. I mentioned yesterday that Brother Hutchings wants to let listeners to some of the stations know that we really do need to hear from you. A couple more on his list are WITK in the Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania area, and WCPC, Tupelo, Mississippi. The only way we can stay on these or any other station is by your support, and we really do appreciate it, especially during anniversary month. Stay tuned for a Bible in the News report over most of these stations. And be here tomorrow when Brother Hutchings, Dr. Spargimino, and Dr. Bob Glaze talk about Satan's assault on your Watchman on the Wall program of Southwest Radio Ministries.